Funny thing, it was the smell of cornmeal this morning that brought it all back. Just a plain old skillet of cornbread baking in the oven. My granddaughter was making it, bless her heart, following that recipe I passed down from my mama. But the moment I smelled it, warm and golden with that little edge of burnt crust, well, my hands stopped their knitting and I just sat there still as a church pew. You see, that smell ain't just supper to me. That's memory. That's 9 years old, barefoot on a dusty kitchen floor, watching Mama try to stretch one egg and a scoop of flour to feed 7 hungry mouths. That's 1929. That's the year the wind changed. Now I know most folks talk about the Great Depression like it was a chapter in a history book, a headline, a graph. But let me tell you something, it wasn't just numbers falling on Wall Street. It was my daddy standing in the field, looking up at a sky that didn't promise nothing but dust. He used to say, Edna made the lamb always take care of us. But one afternoon, when that first big wind rolled in from the west, dry and angry, like it had a bone to pick with the world, he came in the house, sat at the table, and didn't say a word. Just took his hat off, laid it on his knee, and stared at the wall. That's when I knew something had turned. He never looked at the land the same way after that. It wasn't like we had a whole lot to begin with. Just a patch of earth outside Abilene, some chickens, and a cow that gave more attitude than milk. But we made do. Lord have mercy, did we ever. Mama grew up speaking German in her daddy's kitchen, but by the time she married my daddy, a doughboy come home from the war with half a lung and a whole lot of grit, she'd learned how to make something out of nothing. That fall, when the crop failed and the rain stopped calling, she didn't cry. Not once. She pulled the sugar jars off the shelf, started boiling down what little fruit we had left, and sold jars of jam at the train station for nickels. Sometimes she'd come home with just enough money for a sack of flour. And she'd say, well, that's one more supper, Edna girl. And I'd nod like I understood. But truth is, I didn't. Not then. What I did understand, what I remember just as clear as the lines on my hands, was the sound of her humming at night. Soft, like she was trying not to wake the sadness sleeping beside her. That's what makes me want to tell this story now. Because the world today, it moves so fast, honey. Too fast. And folks forget. They forget what it means to sit still and listen. To remember. There's a story I've kept to myself for many years, but lately I've been thinking maybe it's time I shared it. Not for me. I've made peace with most of it, I reckon. But for the young ones. For those who look around when things get hard and think the world's fallen apart. I want them to know the world's always had cracks in it. But family's the glue. So let me take you back. To a time when the sky turned brown and the cupboards were empty. To a little girl with dusty feet and a hungry belly, learning the first hard lessons of love, pride, and survival. I didn't know it back then, but those years would shape every breath I took after. Now go on, pour yourself a cup of something warm, pull up a chair, and listen close. 'Cause what I'm about to tell you, well, it might just change the way you see your own kin. And if it don't, land sakes alive, maybe you weren't listening close enough. Now when I close my eyes and think back to those early years, the first thing I see ain't the dust or the empty cupboards. No, ma'am. It's the way the morning light came through the kitchen curtains. Soft and golden, dancing across the chipped enamel sink and the blue canisters Mama kept her flour and sugar in, though sugar was more memory than a thing we had much of. We lived in a little white house with a sagging porch about 8 miles outside of Abilene. Just far enough from town that if something broke, you learned to fix it yourself, or you did without. Our closest neighbors were a quarter mile down the road, and even they felt like kin, 'cause we all had nothing together. And that kind of nothing, well, it brings folks close. I was the middle child of 5. 2 older brothers who thought they were men long before they were, and 2 younger sisters who followed me round like shadow pups. I was 9 when the Depression hit, but even before that, I knew what it meant to be making do. We didn't have a pot to pee in, as my daddy would say, but Mama, Lord, she had a way of making beans taste like Sunday dinner. She always set the table like we were expecting company. Clean cloth even if it had holes. The good plates even if they didn't match. And she'd say, presentation matters, Edna May. Poor don't have to mean pitiful. We all had our chores. I was in charge of sweepin' the porch every mornin' and helpin' Mama with the bread when we had flour enough. We'd use bacon grease instead of butter, and if we were real lucky, we'd scrape up just enough sorghum to drizzle on top. That was dessert. And Lord have mercy, the way we'd smile over that like it was Christmas come early. Life back then, it was slow, steady, quiet. No phones. No buzzin', no beeps. Just the rooster, the creak of the barn door, the hum of Mama's voice while she worked. She had the kind of strength you don't teach, the kind that comes from women who've been through hard winters and still find time to comb their daughter's hair gentle at night. I used to believe the world was smaller than it is. That it began at the edge of our fields and ended at the church steps on Sunday. I thought Daddy knew everything there was to know, 'cause he could split wood in 3 strokes and fix a plow with twine and a prayer. And I thought Mama's biscuits could fix anything: sadness, stomach aches, bad dreams. I remember thinking if I could just grow up to be half the woman she was, I'd be doing all right. We didn't talk much about dreams in those days. It wasn't that we didn't have them, it was that dreams felt expensive. Like things other people in magazines had. Still, I dreamed. I dreamed of a yellow dress like I saw in the Sears catalog and a pair of shoes that weren't handed down from both my brothers. I dreamed of singing on a radio someday, and of having a house with curtains that didn't have to be made out of flour sacks. But most of all, I dreamed of growing up, fallin' in love, and raising a family that stuck together through thick and thin, just like mine did. You young folks wouldn't understand, maybe, but back then, pride meant something different. It wasn't about looking important or having things. It was about how you carried yourself when you didn't. About clean clothes on Sunday, even if they were threadbare. About shirning your one good pair of shoes before church. About not taking handouts unless you absolutely had to, and saying thank you when you did. That's how Mama taught us. With her hands in dough and her chin held high. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy. But those small, simple days, they're stitched into me like the quilt on my bed. I didn't know it then, but every pot of beans, every biscuit baked with care, every kind word shared in hard times, it was laying the foundation for everything I'd ever understand about dignity, about family, about love. I'll tell you what, there comes a time in a child's life when you realize your parents ain't made of stone, that they can bend, break, or worse, just fade into the background like old wallpaper. For me, that moment came one afternoon in late October when the wind had been blowing steady for days and everything outside looked the color of a paper bag. I was sitting on the floor stringing beans with my sisters when I looked up and saw Daddy just sitting on the porch. He had his elbows on his knees, staring out into the fields like he was trying to see something that wasn't there anymore. He wasn't humming. Now my daddy, he always hummed. When he chopped wood, when he fed the chickens, even when he fixed the fence with that old hammer with the crooked head. Little tunes, mostly hymns leaning on the everlasting arms, was his favorite. But that day, not a note. Just the creak of the rocker and the sound of dust hitting the window panes like dry rice. At first I thought maybe he was just tired. But then it went on. Days passed, then weeks, and he kept sinking into himself like an old house that lean. He stopped talking much, stopped looking folks in the eye. He still did his chores, Daddy was too proud not to, but he did like a man walking through fog. Mama noticed, of course. We all did. But she never said it out loud. Just patted his shoulder a little longer when she passed behind him. I'd catch her watching him sometimes, her face going soft the way it did when she thought no one was looking. And I started watching him too. Not like a daughter watching her daddy, but like someone trying to solve a riddle they're too young to understand. One night, I woke up and found him sitting at the kitchen table staring at his boots. The lamp was low, just barely lighting the room, and I stood there in the hallway, not breathing. He was holding a letter, creased and yellowed, with the kind of care a man gives to things that hurt him. I never did find out what was in that letter. Maybe it was from an old war buddy. Maybe it was a final word from the bank. Or maybe it wasn't important at all. But that look on his face, it was like he'd gone somewhere far off and left just a shell sitting there in his place. And I felt it right then. A little pull in my chest. A tightness that said, something's changing, Edna. Pay attention. I couldn't have told you what it meant, I didn't have the words back then. But it was the first time I felt the weight of being the middle one, of needing to understand things Mama didn't say and Daddy couldn't. That moment, quiet, nothing dramatic, it changed me. Funny thing is, Daddy still cut the wood, still fixed what needed fixin', but the music was gone, and with it, some part of him. Mama started talking more to us girls at night, askin' us about our days, teachin' us little things, like how to hem a torn dress or make a button stew from scraps. It was like she was fillin' the space, like she knew the silence was growin' and she needed to build a wall of words around us to keep the cold out. I didn't know it then, but that's the moment I started growing up. Not when my first tooth fell out or when I helped Mama deliver a calf. No. It was the day I saw the strongest man I knew go quiet. And I knew deep down that we were gonna have to be stronger than we thought. Lord have mercy. Sometimes it ain't the storm itself that undoes you, it's the stillness that follows. That quiet where your breath feels too loud and even the chickens stop making noise like they know something ain't right. That winter after Daddy stopped hummin', well, it was the coldest I remember. Not in temperature, though the frost it cracked the water bucket clean in two one morning, but in the way the house felt. Like a hush settled over everything. Mama tried to keep things moving like always, bless her, but the rhythm was different. Slower. Heavier. Daddy went out every morning same as always, but there was a slope in his shoulders like he was carrying more than tools. And we felt it. We didn't know what to call it back then, not depression, not grief, but I'd wake up with my stomach in knots and didn't know why. Just wrongness in the air. That's when the real fear started setting in. We were behind on the land note. The bankman came by once, all smiles and paperwork, and Daddy didn't say a word to him. Just closed the door and went straight to the barn. I followed him out later, trying to be quiet, and I saw him lean his head against the mule stall, not moving. Like he needed that old mule to hold him up. And I remember feeling ashamed. Not of him, but of myself for watching something so private. For wanting my daddy to fix everything like he always had and realizing he couldn't. That's a hard thing for a little girl to hold, the wanting and the knowing it won't come. Mama started selling more jam and tahine and mending work from town. She'd stay up late with her lamp and her needle, and sometimes I'd see her fingers bleed. But she never stopped. She'd whisper prayers while she worked, and I'd pretend I was sleeping so she wouldn't know I was listening. I wanted to ask her if we were gonna lose the farm, but the words got stuck somewhere deep. We were all holding our breath that winter, hoping for something to break before we did. Then came that radio. It arrived on a Wednesday. An old wood case Foco with a crack across the dial. A neighbor had traded it to us for 3 jars of Mama's strawberry preserves and a promise Daddy would fix his fence come spring. Daddy didn't even look at it, but Mama wiped it down with her apron like it was something holy. That night, she gathered us round and fiddled with the knob till static turned into voices. Real voices. News from far-off cities. Music. Laughter. And then President Roosevelt. That soft, steady voice like a warm quilt over cold knees. My friends, he said, and I remembered the way Mama closed her eyes and nodded. Like he was talking straight to her. We sat there, all 5 kids and Mama, huddled close like it was a campfire and not just words. It didn't fix anything. The crops were still dead, Daddy was still quiet, and there still wasn't meat in the stew. But that voice on the radio, it made us feel not so alone. That's when my oldest brother, Earl, looked up from where he'd been staring at his boots and said, "Maybe I can join one o' them camps, that CCC thing." First time he'd spoken in days. Mama nodded, and I could see the pride in her eyes mix in with fear. Letting go of a son, even for something good, don't come easy. I didn't know it at the time, but that little wooden box, full of voices and hope, kept our family from falling apart. It gave us back a rhythm, a sound in the silence. And inside me, it stirred something too. A tiny ember. That maybe, just maybe, things could turn around if we held on tight and listened real close. I remember the cold. Not the kind that bites, but the kind that settles in your bones, slow and stubborn. It was December, I don't recall the day, but I remember the sky was gray like wet wool, and the wind had a way of sneaking into the house no matter how tight you shut the doors. We'd stuffed rags around the windows and lined the floor with old feed sacks, but the chill still made its way into our toes. That morning, Mama had us all up early to help with chores, but she was moving slower than usual, coughing now and then into her apron like she didn't want us to notice. Daddy had gone off to try and trade some eggs. We only had 3 for a sack of cornmeal, and the rest of us were just trying not to get in each other's way. I don't know how long the box sat out there. Maybe an hour, maybe minutes. But it was little May who found it. She opened the front door, and there it was, a plain brown box with twine sitting on the porch like a small miracle. No note, no knock, just there. She called out and we all came running. I stood real still while Mama knelt down and untied the string. Her hands were trembling. Inside were 5 pairs of shoes, worn but clean, polished up like someone cared, and right there on top, nestled in a square of cloth, was an orange. A single orange, bright as sunrise. Now I want you to understand what that meant. We hadn't seen shoes that weren't patched in 3 winters. And an orange? That was a treasure. That was Christmas, summer, sunshine, and heaven all wrapped into one. Mama just stared for a second. Then she reached up, real slow, and touched her cheek. That's when I saw a tear. First time I ever saw Mama cry from anything other than pain. She didn't sob. She didn't speak. Just let that one tear fall while her other hand went to her heart. I felt my chest go tight. Like the air had left the room. Like time had stopped and the world had gone quiet just long enough to make space for this moment. I looked at her and I didn't see the woman who held us together with prayer and biscuits and thread. I saw a little girl, lost and grateful and tired all at once. And I didn't know what to do with that. I wanted to hug her, but I just stood there. Still. So still. I think that's when it hit me. Kindness didn't always come wrapped in explanations. And sometimes the hardest thing in the world is accepting help when you're trying so hard to stay proud. Mama taught us never to expect handouts. We make do with what we have, she always said. But that day, she didn't push the box away. She didn't tell us to send it back. She just nodded, took a breath, and handed each of us a pair of shoes with quiet hands. I got the ones with laces. Brown, a little big, with a scuff on the toe. I wore them every day for 2 years. But what I remember most wasn't how they felt, it was how they made me stand. Straighter. Taller. Like maybe the world hadn't forgotten us after all. We never found out who left that box. Some said it was a church lady. Others whispered about the teacher from town. But in my heart, I never needed to know. Because whoever it was, they didn't just give us shoes. They gave us dignity. A little breath when we were drowning. And maybe that's the thing that changed me most. I started to believe that people, even strangers, could still be good. That maybe the world wasn't all dust and silence. I never forgot that orange, neither. We split it 6 ways, even gave a sliver to the dog. And when I tasted it, I swear it was the sweetest thing I ever put in my mouth. After the box of shoes came and went, life didn't get easier. The sky didn't suddenly clear and the cupboards didn't fill themselves. No miracle followed. It was just quieter. Like the world had exhaled after holding its breath too long, and all that was left was the dust settling back down on our windowsills. Daddy didn't say much those days. He'd go out to the fields even when there was nothing to tend, standing there with his hat in his hand, staring at ground that wouldn't give. Mama moved slower, too, the spark in her eyes dimmed some, and that cough she tried to hide got sharper. And as kids, well, we learned to move in the silence. We played softer, asked fewer questions, looked at the calendar not for birthdays, but to count how many days we might stretch the beans in the pot. There was a boy named Charlie who started sleeping in our barn around that time. I don't know where he came from, just showed up one evening near sundown with a busted satchel and eyes too old for his face. He couldn't have been more than 16, but the way he carried himself, you'd think he'd been fighting life since he could walk. He didn't ask for nothing. Just curled up in the straw near the back, trying to make himself small. Earl found him first. Brought him a blanket without saying a word. Mama said nothing either, just left an extra biscuit by the barn door the next morning and kept doing so every day after. Charlie stayed with us nearly 2 months. Never said much. He'd help chop wood, feed the hens, fix whatever needed fixin'. He had this way of being invisible, not out of rudeness, just out of habit, I think. Like he figured if he made too much noise, someone might remember to send him away. But I saw him. I watched him sit by himself behind the barn at night, carving little shapes out of scrap wood with a pocket knife he carried like it was the last thing he owned. Sometimes I'd bring him thread for Whitlin. We didn't talk, but in that quiet there was something, a kind of understanding. Two kids, both changed too soon by things they didn't choose. It was around then I stopped dreaming the way I used to. Not because I didn't want to, but because dreaming felt dangerous. Like hope was something I had to ration, like sugar or shoes. I'd look at the stars some nights and wonder if they were looking down at better lives. But mostly I just felt hollow. Like part of me had gone quiet too. That bright little girl who used to pretend she was singing on the radio. She was still in there, but muffled. Like someone had turned her volume down. I didn't stop believing in people. Not completely. The box, the radio, Charlie, they were proof enough that kindness still had a place in the world. But I started to see things different. I saw how grown folks carried hurt like extra weight. How silence could be heavy. How pride could be a shield and a prison all at once. And I learned something else too, that sometimes given what little you have is the only way to feel like you still got something left. That was Mama's wisdom, though she never said it outright. She just showed it day in day out. Charlie left one morning before sunup. Just gone. No note. No goodbye. Just his blanket folded neat on the hay and a little wood carving sittin' on the porch rail. It was a bird, wings open. I kept it for years. Sometimes I still reach for it on my nightstand, just to feel the shape of it in my palm, to remind myself there's grace even in the quietest exits. After that winter I wasn't the same. None of us were. But somehow in the emptiness, in the hush after the storm, I found something steadier than joy. I found endurance. And sometimes that's all you can hold on to. It started with a cough. Not the dry little tickle she'd had all winter, but deep, like it came from somewhere far inside her chest. Mama said it was the weather. Just the wind messin' with my lungs, she told us, waving her hand like she could shoo worry out the door. But I knew better. I saw the way she winced when she stood too fast. I noticed how she leaned against the counter a little longer while stirring the pot, how she sat down sooner, got quiet quicker. One night, I found her in the kitchen by lamplight, holding onto the table with both hands just to stay upright. When she looked up and saw me, she tried to smile, but it wasn't her smile. It was a mask stretched thin by pain. I didn't say nothing. I just nodded. She nodded back. That was our way back then. When Daddy realized she was truly unwell, it changed something in him. That silence he'd been living in cracked a little. He started watching her, not like a man lost, but like someone afraid of what he might lose. We didn't have money for doctors. Closest clinic was too far, and the truck hadn't run in months anyhow. So we did what folks did in those days, we leaned on each other. Word spread quiet and quick. That's how it was back then. You didn't need to announce anything, trouble had a scent, and neighbors could smell it like rain comin'. Mrs. Ledbetter showed up with jars of soup and her own mother's recipe for willow bark tea. Old Mr. Tompkins came round to chop wood and patch the chicken coop. Even the preacher's wife brought scraps for making broth. None of it fixed Mama. But it fixed something in the house, filled it up with the sounds of life again. Footsteps, voices, kindness. And for the first time in a long while I felt something stir in me. A little warmth, a little weight in the chest that wasn't fear. It was care, not just talking it, but giving it. Mama got worse before she got better. I won't pretend otherwise. Some days she couldn't get out of bed, and I'd sit there holding her hand, brushing her hair, whisperin' old hymns she used to hum while baking. That's when I started writing things down, her recipes, little bits of wisdom, odd thoughts she said in the haze of fever. Cornbread for 12, she muttered once, when you only have 6. That's how you feed love. I wrote it down. I didn't know why at the time. Just knew it felt important. And then one morning she sat up. Real slow. Her eyes were clearer and she asked for tea. Just like that. It wasn't a miracle, not the kind with trumpets or angels. But it was enough. A breath after weeks of holding it. I cried quiet like, turning my face so she wouldn't see. But she saw. Of course she did. She patted my hand and said, "We ain't done yet, girl." And I believed her. That was the day I stopped waiting for life to fix itself. I started helping where I could, not just at home but around the holler. Mended a coat for the Ledbetter boy. Helped Mrs. Tompkins scrub her porch steps. It wasn't much. But it was movement. Purpose. A slow, steady kind of hope. Not the loud kind that comes with promises, but the quiet kind that grows roots deep enough to hold through another storm. And maybe that's when I first learned the real strength of women, how we break in silence but we rebuild in whispers. How we keep going, not cause we ain't scared, but cause somebody's gotta boil the water and hold the line. There was a Sunday, not long after Mama started getting her strength back, when the whole world felt softer. I remember the sun peeking through the clouds like it was shy, not bold like in summer, just enough to warm the porch boards. The wind was gentle and the chickens weren't fussing, and for the first time in what felt like 100 years, I heard someone laugh. A real laugh from Earl of all people when little May tripped over a basket and spilled peas everywhere. It wasn't cruel, just real. And I remember standing in the doorway with my hands in my apron and thinking maybe, just maybe, we'd made it through. That afternoon, we brought out the chairs in the old washtub base, and Bobby pulled out his fiddle, even though the strings were worn near bare. We sang nothing fancy, just old hymns and folk songs, in that silly one about the possum in the pear tree Mama always liked. And we didn't sing because we were happy, we sang because we were alive. There's a difference. And I realized as I clapped along that I hadn't really let myself feel anything in a long while. I'd been holding it all, the worry, the grief, the what-ifs, like a tight string inside me. But that day on that porch, with bare feet and voices rising up to the heavens, I felt the string snap. I cried. Quiet at first. Just tears running down without a skin. Then deep, shoulder-shaking sobs that caught in my throat. And I didn't hide this time. I let it out. All of it. Mama reached over and took my hand, squeezed it, didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She knew that I'd been carrying more than my share, that I'd been trying to be strong for everybody and forgot to be kind to myself. That's when it hit me. I had a choice. A real, honest-to-goodness choice. I could keep dragging this past behind me like a sack of broken things, or I could let some of it go. That night, after everyone went to bed, I walked out to the barn. It was quiet, just the sound of crickets in the old boards creaking with the wind. I climbed up into the loft where we kept things, old jars, feed sacks, and the box of letters from when Daddy still wrote poems on scraps of newsprint. And there it was, the little pair of shoes from that December. The ones I'd outgrown but never thrown away. I held them for a long time, my fingers running over the worn leather, remembering how proud I felt wearing them. Then I laid them down gently and stepped away. I didn't throw them out. I didn't burn them like in those dramatic stories. But I left them there, not as a burden, as a memory. And I walked back inside with empty hands and a lighter heart. That was the night I chose to live different. I didn't announce it to the world. I didn't stand on a mountaintop. I just whispered it to myself. I forgive it all. I forgive me. And Lord, I meant it. The shame, the sorrow, the silence, I let it rest. I didn't need it anymore. I don't know if I found peace that night, but I found stillness. And sometimes, child, stillness is the best a soul can ask for. From that day on, I didn't wait for life to get better. I made it better where I could. A kind word. A warm biscuit. A song on a Sunday. No fanfare. Just life, lived on purpose. I chose to keep going. Without anger. Without blame. Just forward. And that, well, that changed everything. You know, folks always talk about the big moments, the weddings, the births, the goodbyes. But I think the truth of a life lives in the quiet things. The seconds you don't know are gonna matter until years later, when they bloom in your memory like wildflowers in an old field. For me, one of those moments was a dance. Just one. One night. One dress. But it stayed with me longer than most things I thought would. I was 16. We didn't have much still, the depression didn't end overnight, you understand, but we'd learned how to smile again. How to sing on Sundays and laugh on porches. That spring, the church held a community social, just some music and punch in the barn behind the old feed store. I didn't have a dress fit for dancing, but Mama, she pulled out her old faded blue one from before she married Daddy, and with the little stitchin' and tuckin', she made it fit. She even let me wear her brooch, just a tiny thing with a missing stone, but to me it was the crown jewels. When I caught my reflection in the glass, I didn't see the girl who'd spent years mendin', stretchin', survivin'. I saw someone new. Someone whole. The boy's name was Samuel. Freckled, shy, soft-spoken, the kind of boy who says, "Yes, ma'am," without even thinking. We'd spoken once or twice at church, nothing more than polite words in sideways glances. But that night, he walked across the barn floor, looked right at me, and asked, "May I have this dance?" My hand shook something awful. My mouth went dry. But I nodded, and he took my hand like it was made of glass. We didn't talk much, just moved in a slow circle under the light of a lantern hanging from the rafter, the sound of the fiddle soft and sweet. And in that moment, I wasn't thinking about droughts or debts or broken shoes. I was just a girl, dancing, being seen. I never married Samuel. He left for work in Oklahoma and life rolled on as it does. But that dance, it stayed with me. Not because it was romantic or perfect, but because it reminded me I was still allowed to want joy. Still allowed to be more than just what life had demanded of me. And now, sitting here on this porch with a blanket in my lap and time wrapped around me like an old shawl, I think about that girl, the one in the blue dress with her heart open wide, and I see how far we've come. This world now moves so fast, honey. Everything's loud and lit up in Russian. But let me tell you something, the best parts of living ain't in the hustle. They're in the slow, soft things. The shared meals. The second chances. The songs you hum when no one's listening. If there's one thing I've learned, and Lord knows I've lived long enough to learn a few, it's this: you don't wait for the world to make room for your happiness. You make it. Out of scraps if you have to. You find the dress even if it's patched. You take the dance even if it's just one. I spent too many years thinking I had to earn peace or wait for some perfect time to be happy. But peace don't wait for you, child. Joy don't need permission. Sometimes it's already there in the corner of the room, in the boy who asks you to dance, in the recipe passed down on yellowed paper. You just gotta reach for it. So maybe, just maybe, it's your turn now. Maybe it's time you stop waiting for the world to settle down or for someone to tell you it's okay to live again. You don't need a full table to feel full. You don't need perfect shoes to stand tall. Maybe it's time to put on your dress and take the dance. You've sat here a long while with me, child. Listen close. And I thank you for that, truly. Most folks don't take the time anymore. But you did. You heard my story piece by piece, like I was pulling threads out of an old quilt. And maybe that's just what this is, a patchwork of memory, stitched together with truth and a little bit of ache. I reckon you're wondering why I told you all this. Why dust off a past that's been packed away in cedar boxes in prayer? Well, let me tell you, it ain't just about the Great Depression. It ain't just about hardship or beans or cold nights or hand-me-down shoes. No, this story is about what stayed. About what lasted when everything else got stripped away. You see, the Depression didn't just take, though Lord knows it took plenty. It revealed. It showed you what you were made of. Who stood by you when the money dried up. Who came knocking when there was nothing in your cupboards but pride and a couple onions. It taught me that family ain't always blood. Sometimes it's a neighbor with a spare coat, or a stranger with 5 pairs of shoes and a single orange. It taught me that the smallest kindness can echo longer than any sermon. And that survival, real survival, don't come from what you have, but who you hold on to. I've seen a lot in my 105 years. Wars, peace, television, the moon landing, grandbabies with eyes like mine and voices full of fire. The world's changed more than I could have dreamed sitting on that old porch outside Abilene. But the one thing that's never changed, not once, is this: we were built for each other. Humans. We're not meant to go it alone. We need hands to hold, stories to pass down, tables to gather around even when there's not much on the plate. I tell my granddaughter that every time she worries about the state of the world. I say, baby, you can't control the wind, but you can plant your feet. That's what we did. Every day, we planted our feet. Through dust and loss and hunger and heartache. We didn't always know what tomorrow would bring, but we knew who'd be standing beside us when it came. I hope you remember that. Not just when times get hard, but especially when they feel easy. Don't wait till the storm comes to see what matters. Look now. Right now. Who do you love? Who do you carry? Who's carrying you even if you don't notice? And let me ask you something just between us. Do you think real love always finds its way back? I wonder about that sometimes. About Samuel, that boy with the freckled smile and slow hands. I never saw him again after that dance. But every so often, when the wind shifts just right, and the fiddle plays low on the radio, I think I see him, just out the corner of my memory, looking at me like he did that night in the barn. And sometimes I catch myself humming and I wonder, did he remember me too? Maybe that's what stories are for. To keep the people we love from vanishing completely. To keep their names warm on our tongues. To remind us that even when everything falls away, what you gave and who you gave it to, that stays. That's the real inheritance. Not land, not silver, not even the cornbread recipe. The Lord knows that's a close second. So I'll end with this, sweetheart, not a lesson, but a little hope wrapped in words. If you're waiting for the right time, for the perfect sign, for everything to feel safe before you start living or loving again, don't. Start now. However messy, however small. Because sometimes the thing we're waiting for has been waiting on us.